Hello, I'm Olivia Harber, and I'm excited to share my senior project with you today, all the way from West Seattle. Titled Equitably Shifting Transportation Behavior, this project was inspired by my interest in the motivation behind people's transportation choices and how to influence those to be more sustainable. Moving from Los Angeles to Seattle for college showed me what access to reliable public transportation can do for your quality of life, but also for the environment. Growing up in LA and having to rely on cars to get almost anywhere was not fun. No one likes sitting in traffic or crossing up to 6 lanes of traffic to get to your freeway exit. I only realized that this wasn't the only way to get around, however, when I came to Seattle and lived outside a bus stop that served routes straight downtown, or I could walk along the Burt Gilman Trail for just a couple blocks to our wonderful light rail station. This stark difference in how I experienced these two cities that I loved made it hard for me to understand why so many people and classmates I was surrounded with did not take advantage of the transit systems here, or simply weren't as enthusiastic about them as me. Part of this is definitely just because I've become a transit nerd, but for me, riding public transportation has shown me an odd new kind of comfort. The act of giving up control of your commute or trip from 1 minute to 50 and knowing the driver will get you where you need to go has been so freeing for me in such a hectic time like college. I feel like I can take a deep breath once I've boarded a bus or train and know I'm on my way to my destination. And all I need to do is read a book, listen to music, or just look out the window. I don't need to do the driving or worry at what speed or how cautiously I'm traveling. Once I board the bus, it's out of my reins. I understand how this can be the opposite of appealing to some, but was so curious why I have such a strong positive association with riding transit, and some people I know cannot fathom that. Setting aside the financial and geographic factors in people's decision to use a car versus public transportation, I personally really wanted to learn how to understand people's transportation choices and if it's possible to sway those decisions. This whole project has been conducted with the caveat that I believe that better infrastructure would be the greatest driver of more sustainable transportation. If everyone had access to affordable, reliable, nearby, and accessible public transit, so many more people would be riding it, and I would not have a reason to do this project. Why should people switch the way they transport themselves and move around in the world? I find the act of driving can be genuinely fun, and many people find their cars to be a huge source of freedom. Yet, as I've described, I've experienced, there can also be huge impacts on your quality of life and even physical health. However, the lens I take in this project, and in just how I view a lot of the world, is within climate change. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency shows that greenhouse gas emissions from transportation accounted for about 27% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in 2020, making it the largest contributor of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Over half of all of those transportation emissions are from passenger cars and trucks, not flying planes or shipping packages to you. Knowing that many of us have access to more sustainable options, but have been conditioned to think that driving is the only way to move around in space, both from social norms and from the infrastructure that surrounds us in the U.S., I wanted to ask how one could ever go about shifting that perception. My research question to distill down that topic is, what is the most equitable and effective way to run a transportation behavior change campaign? This led me to first researching behavior change and social marketing. Through research on academic texts and interviews with professionals in this field and experiences through my internship at the Seattle Department of Transportation, I was determined to become an expert on transportation behavior change. The first thing I learned is that this type of work of getting people to change their transportation habits is typically divided into 2 types of campaigns. Transportation demand management, or TDM, is typically employer-based and focuses on commute trips, whereas individual marketing campaigns aim to reach all residents and address all trip types. Some signature aspects of individual marketing campaigns include a focus on all trips, not just commute trips, and all sustainable travel modes, a time-limited campaign, and an opt-in model that invites everyone to participate but focuses resources on people who self-identify as interested. This last point has been interesting to note during my focus on equity in behavior change campaigns. as I found it to be quite effective for my case studies to target different populations or geographic areas with different resources and messaging. IM campaigns also operate under the assumption that the primary barriers to using more sustainable options are low awareness of options, low confidence about using options, and strong habits around driving. Through my internship at the Seattle Department of Transportation, I found a fascinating case study in the Flip Your Trip campaign. This program was created by SDOT to address the traffic patterns and congestion in West Seattle and the Duwamish Valley while the West Seattle High-Rise Bridge is closed. This bridge connects West Seattle with the rest of the city and crosses the Duwamish Waterway. Carrying over 100,000 people each day by both bus and car, the region suddenly faced a huge challenge to their mobility when the bridge was closed for repair in March 2020. In response to the bridge closure, SDOT created a broad program called Reconnect West Seattle, aiming to reconnect the West Seattle Peninsula to similar levels of travel across the Duwamish to those seen before the closure of the high-rise bridge, while also reducing the environmental injustices that impact communities in the Duwamish Valley. I was interested in this campaign because of its approach to behavior change, but especially because of its emphasis on equity. Equity is defined by the University of Washington as ensuring that access, resources, and opportunities are provided for all to succeed and grow, especially for those who are underrepresented and have been historically disadvantaged. Additionally, one of SDOT's values and goals is equity, where they state, "We believe transportation must meet the needs of communities of color and those of all incomes, abilities, and ages. Our goal is to partner with communities to build a racially equitable and socially just transportation system." Both of these definitions inform my view of equity and my decision to center the idea in my capstone project. As is the case in much of society and urban planning, there is never a one-size-fits-all solution that benefits everyone equally or takes from people in the same way. Thus, equity is imperative to examine when planning any sort of transportation plan, especially when asking people to change their habits when we know that such different things inform those habits in the first place. So, why should equity be a consideration in a program like this? Well, the geographic context is extremely important to understand who the bridge closure affects and how that varies so widely. While those in the northern region of West Seattle now struggle to cross the Duwamish River and leave the accidental island, the bridge closure especially negatively impacted the lives of those living along the bridge detour routes. These people live in some of Seattle's most diverse and historically underserved neighborhoods and already experience poorer health outcomes related to air pollution than the city as a whole. So I did all of this background research to examine how the Flip Your Trip campaign would apply an equitable approach to their behavior change efforts in the region. And out of all of the case studies I looked at, from behavior change programs in Los Angeles to ones across Canada to programs in DC, I have not found one that so holistically applies an equitable understanding to the barriers and to the solutions that they offer, as well as the Flip Your Trip program does. While the Reconnect West Seattle program is working hard to support people's ability to get around while the bridge is closed, Flip Your Trip is taking advantage of the bridge closure to urge people towards more sustainable options. So how did the city accommodate losing 90% of travel across the Duwamish Waterway and try to turn it into something good? Now I'm really focusing on how they did this with an equitable approach, but I figured I should tell you what they did too. The Flip Your Trip campaign provided information and education on the travel options in West Seattle and the Duwamish Valley, gave out vouchers to ride the bus, water taxi, and electric scooters for free, then earn rewards with them, provide trip planning to help people in the area plan their safest and even lowest emission commute, and create a dialogue around transportation habits. Now that that's clearer, what did I find that made the Flip Your Trip program successful in terms of equity and effectively running a behavior change campaign? After reading through dozens of city planning and brainstorm documents, meeting with the consultants and experts on this project, and conducting outreach alongside them for the program itself, I found equity to be core in each of these aspects. The process of creating the behavior change campaign, the materials or content and their framing, and the distribution of that message. First, the process of creating this program displayed how a behavior change campaign can be sensitive and inclusive to its target audience, even under huge time constraints like the immediate closure of the bridge created. Beginning with focus groups to understand the barriers that people faced in those areas, this campaign intentionally included and worked off of the voices of those directly impacted from the start. To make a behavior change plan and to guide the entire project, SDOT staff co-created a racial equity toolkit, which was the most robust racial equity toolkit the city has ever seen. This toolkit ensured that each project aligned on the following racial equity outcomes. Center equity concerns with a focus on vulnerable populations and underserved communities that are at risk of disproportionate impacts resulting from the West Seattle High Bridge safety closure. Reduce the impact of environmental injustice in the Duwamish Valley and in their communications and investment. Support safe and sustainable travel through the geographically impacted communities for all travel needs. Support access to and recovery of local businesses and commercial districts. Ensure equitable and safe access to public space for recreation and health. Centering these goals in every aspect of the Flip Your Trip program has given it a great foundation in accessible, equitable goals and thus its results. They also intentionally assured that their grant funds from the Federal Highway Administration were used to build capacity with local organizations that already serve the community, rather than just dropping in as a program and then cutting ties once the bridge reopens. This allowed more trust with people who may not typically engage with transportation programs but need the most representation in them. This also included adding Georgetown neighborhood into the program's service area because the detour routes congested the region even across the water. Second, this is a social marketing campaign, so the marketing tools themselves and the framing of content have to show that same dedication to equity. Flip Your Trip shows how these marketing tools are most effective when accessible and relevant to their audience. If you hope to change the behavior of consumers, not change legislation or infrastructure, still need to do that too, they have to understand it in the first place and know that it applies to them. As a governmental project, this can be hard, but Flip Your Trip made all of their messaging approachable as opposed to bureaucratic and jargony. The message was clear. If you live or work here, obviously the bridge closure is making your life harder. So here's $25 for the bus or transit. They also created a mascot of sorts. Sal the Salmon was an outlet for snarky content to cut through to people and make light of a frustrating situation. She also always got the attention of kids, and I even had some girls come up to me at the West Seattle Farmers Market who already knew Sal's name. Third, the distribution of these messages was successful in who they wanted to listen and how they could get their attention. They understood that people in Alki and the northern parts of West Seattle have very different experiences and resources than people in South Park or Georgetown. So Flip Your Trip distributed its incentives and resources in different ways for different populations. This looked like first mailing postcards to every home in the service area to make sure there was an equal opportunity to engage with the program. SDOT staff and consultants and myself then conducted outreach by attending local community events and farmers markets in different neighborhoods to reach different communities. They ensured all of the text and messaging on everything distributed was trans-created. This means nothing was simply translated, but instead they worked with people from each of the 7 languages it would be distributed in to make sure the same message was represented in different contexts and languages. They also ran an advertisement on a Spanish language radio to invite people to join the program. This project was a wonderful excuse for me to dive into a field I'm passionate about while finding my own approach to look at the human experience of transportation and how that translates into the professional world. I've achieved my goal of wanting to further my understanding of how to actually encourage transportation mode shift, but there's always so much more to learn, and I hope to take that knowledge into my career and beyond Seattle. After academic study of it, internship experience, and personal experience of transportation systems, I wanted to learn the professional approach and only feel more solidified in the future of equitable transportation. Thank you.
Maya hace su, Maya. Haga pipí.